Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my start-sit decisions for every primetime game in Week 16. There's no teams on bye, so I'm splitting this video into two parts, and in this video, we're only talking about 5 specific games. On Thursday, we have a game. We have 2 on Saturday. We have 1 on Monday night, and always 1 on Sunday night. So that is the name of this video. Only 5 games. If you're looking for the afternoon or early morning Sunday windows, those will be posted in part 2 on Thursday morning. So if you don't want to miss out, subscribe to the channel or ring the notification bell and you will be updated once it is posted. But with that in mind, let us begin. We are starting on Thursday night, and we have a very interesting battle that might be a bit more defensive than you might expect. There is some weather factoring in on Thursday night in Seattle. It'll be 50 degrees. Last I checked the forecast, 75% chance of rain, 9 miles per hour. And what you see on the screen is the updated forecast. Last I checked, that's what'll happen. Here below me is the latest up-to-date information. But if you're paying attention to what's going on in the Northwest, there is massive flooding, actually a very scary situation. Some levees have burst. From what I've seen on TikTok, it is a rough situation. So prayers up for the Seahawks. Perhaps it galvanizes the team. Maybe they want to show up for their community. Either way, this is a very big game, and it will be raining. That may play a factor. However, when we look at these defensive stats, the Rams defense is a bit tough. Quarterback, though, is actually getting easier. In the last month, they've allowed the 9th most fantasy points to the position. However, Jared Goff indoors last week maybe is a better circumstance than Darnold outside in the rain. So that, I think, is a tough spot. Darnold just doesn't play well in this matchup, so I might consider it more of a downgrade than upgrade. But in the last month, it is top 10 in terms of points allowed. Versus running backs, though, both defenses are really tough. The Rams have allowed the 2nd fewest points per game to the position. Meanwhile, the Seahawks, the 3rd fewest points. So going to be tough to run on both teams here. However, I have seen some stats in division that really point to Walker and Kyron being productive. However, wide receiver gets a very good matchup versus the Rams. It would be a top 10 matchup. However, the asterisk here is indicative it's even better. This one has gotten way easier in the last month. Maybe matchups play a big role, but in the last 4 games, the Rams have given up the 2nd most points to opposing wide receivers, an average of 175 yards on 13 catches per game with 8 wide receiver touchdowns in that span, an average of 2 touchdowns per week. So good matchup here for JSN and the Seahawks wide receivers. But against Seattle, it is the 2nd toughest on the year. And in the last month, it's even worse. It would rank dead last by a wide margin. It's way, way down in recent history. So perhaps last week against Phillip Rivers does skew it a bit, but the Seahawks are not a good spot at all. At tight end against the Rams, it's actually even tougher than the 23rd ranked defense. In the last month, it's actually dead last. They are not giving up an inch to the tight end position, an average of 25 yards per game, not a single touchdown in that span. So good luck with AJ Barner this week. I wouldn't feel too confident against the Rams. But against Seattle, it is a top 10 matchup on the year. You want to start tight ends against the Seahawks. But I think I forgot to mention the Seahawks against quarterbacks would rank bottom 4. In the last month, it's down to number 31. It's even tougher in the last month. So with all of that in mind, let's run through the gauntlet here. At receiver, you're starting both players. JSN, a lock in the lineup, especially against the Rams right now. They're giving up a ton of points. JSN cannot be benched. He's a top 3 receiver every week. But Puka Nacua in the same boat, especially with the injury to Devontae Adams. Puka will get even more looks this week. And against the Seahawks, well, it's not the best matchup, that's for sure. I still am keeping him in the lineup. There's no way I'm benching Puka if I have him, especially considering Devontae Adams is here in the infirmary ward. There is no expectation that Adams at this point in time will be available on Thursday night. He's listed as doubtful now, and although Sean McVay won't rule him out, doubtful, that's basically out at this point. So a bummer. As someone who had Adams, I guess the silver lining is that I didn't advance. I probably would have lost without Adams in my lineup. So good luck replacing him. I wish you the best. And it looks like Colby Parkinson was the next man up last week. But Adams only got hurt in the 4th quarter. They just game planned for Parkinson a lot in that game. And given the matchup here is top 10, I would assume that continues. Colby Parkinson should get more looks than the average tight end this week playing with Stafford. He's had a very good stretch recently. I believe it's 6 total touchdowns in the last 6 games for Parkinson. So his volume's increasing. I think he's a good start this week. Very high upside tight end with the absence of Devontae Adams. But in the run game, we're always trusting Kyren Williams. While Blake Corum is really emerging and definitely playing well, I still trust Kyren. Kyren has not lost his job. Kyren still steps up in this division rivalry. If we look at his last 3 games versus Seattle, he's actually averaging 14.5 points per game, an average 82 yards per game, and he also has 3 rushing touchdowns in those last 3 matchups. So I would expect him to play well. I don't see a reason to fade him. Even if Corum plays well, he can coexist alongside Kyren Williams. So keep him in the lineup. However, this week, I am telling you to start Kenneth Walker. Walker really steps up in this division rivalry. Last time he played them, he had 111 total yards. He also had a touchdown, and that was one of the few rushing touchdowns the Rams had allowed all season up to that point. So Walker has played well against the Rams historically. If we look at his last 4 games, he's averaging 13.1 points per game, only 1 touchdown in that span. However, an average of 102 yards from scrimmage per game. He usually goes over double digits just on yardage alone against the Rams. So he really steps up. This is a good spot for him. Despite a tough matchup on paper, I'm willing to believe that in the rain, he's also getting more volume and he will step up like he always does. So I want Walker in my lineup. I think he will crack 13 points and I think he will find the end zone. But I think both defenses are very legit. I'm a bit worried about the point total in this. I would probably bet the under, especially with the rain. Gotta be a bit less than ideal. And last time we saw these 2 teams play, it's not like Stafford torched them. He had 2 passing touchdowns, but only 130 yards passing. And despite no turnovers, the Seahawks still had a decent floor. They've been an elite defense all year. So I want to keep them in the lineup. I think the rain is going to help them. I think they're still a top 10 play, but we have seen Darnold absolutely crumble in this matchup, whether it was back earlier in the season when he had 4 interceptions, or last year with the Vikings when he had 9 sacks. Even in the regular season, he did not play well against the Rams the first time around. So Rams, I think, will continue their dominance on Darnold. He gets flustered in this spot. So a big game, while I'm trusting JSN and Walker, I still think the Rams defense is a good play. But Blake Corum's on a heater. I think he's a very legit flex play. His last 3 games have been insane. An average of 94 yards per game and only 10 rush attempts per week. He also has 4 rushing touchdowns in the last 3 games. So an average of 17.5 points per game from Blake Corum last 3 weeks. I cannot dismiss that. He is legitimately in the flex conversation, but it does feel like it's destined to dry up. But at the moment, that is not the bet I want to be making. I would assume it continues, and if I'm going to be wrong, I am willing to take that chance. The upside is elite with Blake Corum at the moment. Rashid Shaheed is also playing out of his mind. The last 2 games, he's really been impressive. He had 1 touchdown in the kick return department, but overall his return yardage has been fantastic. He is picking up a lot of yards on kick return. So if you play in a format where that counts, then that's ideal, but most of us, it just doesn't matter. A touchdown, though, is possible in that respect. He's been very effective from a yards per touch standpoint in kick returns. But really, I'm interested in him in the passing game. Last 2 games have been really, really dynamic. An average of 6 targets, 4.5 catches, 71 yards per game, even without any passing touchdowns, including that kick return touchdown. That's an average of 12.3 points per game. But obviously, if you remove the touchdown, that's down to 9.3. That's still a solid flex option. And given the Rams matchup is top 10, I would feel even more confident about Shaheed. His connection with Darnold is getting better. And then he knows this playbook because last year he played for the offensive coordinator. They traded for him for a reason. It's taken a few weeks, but he is now emerging pretty well. So I like Shaheed with some upside, but feels a bit risky. Let's not pretend like it doesn't. And then Stafford, I think, is just a flex play at quarterback. Definitely safer than Darnold. However, if you look at his track record versus the Seahawks, he's not playing very well in fantasy. Last 4 games, an average of 13.8 points per game. Only 5 passing touchdowns in those 4 games, and that's not what you're expecting from Stafford this year. So it's hard to bench him. He's really led you to the promised land, been very good, but without Adams, that's a touchdown I would remove from the equation, and I don't feel like it's a lock. He's going to dominate. With the rain, I think it's also diminished returns. I think he's a little too touchdown dependent this week. So a little worried, not expecting a ton of yards from him, and I could see him burn you. But as a long shot, I do think A.J. Barner really steps up in this matchup. Worth noting, he had 71 total yards last time around against the Rams. He also had 11 targets, 10 catches in that game. He had 12.1 fantasy points without a touchdown against the Rams earlier this year. So that's where I'm still kind of interested, but this matchup is terrible as of late. Would rank dead last 4 games, and that's why maybe I'm not going to trust Barner in my lineup this week. But tight end is deep. If it wasn't, I think he would have upside. He's averaging 9.6 points in his 3 games against the Rams. He has 1 touchdown, an average of 44 yards against them, and then last time they played, he had 10 catches. That was pretty valuable. So Barner is interesting, but hard to trust this week. Tough matchup. And then Tutu Atwell would be my candidate to step up in place of Devontae Adams. But I can't say for sure what'll happen. I don't think it's worth it. Only in DFS would I consider it. The Seahawks are a very tough matchup. But I'm going to be benching Sam Darnold. Doesn't step up in this spot. And we have seen the Seahawks try to win without him quite often. Like last week, they only kicked field goals. I think it's more imperative that they don't turn it over, don't force a lot of sacks, and I think Darnold might not get many touchdowns in this matchup. The Rams have been a bit difficult this year. They've had his number, but lately it's a good matchup. Maybe I'm underestimating how much you should upgrade Sam Darnold, but quarterback is a bit deep at the moment. I think his up and down volatility is not worth the risk. I am telling you to bench Darnold in the rain on Thursday. The Rams matchup, I think, is too difficult for him. Charbonnet, though, I'm telling you to bench, doesn't really step up the way that Walker does. And given Walker, I think will have a good game, that could include a touchdown like it did in the first matchup this year. If that happens, then Charbonnet gets vultured, and that's really the only way he has value. So this week, no thanks. Charbonnet, I don't think is a high upside play, and without a touchdown, you may get less than 5 points. But Cooper Kupp, I think, could score a touchdown. He was this close, actually, from scoring twice on separate plays last time he played the Rams at SoFi. It just didn't work out. One of them, the ball bounced off the turf like literally an inch away from him catching it. And then the other one, I think he was down 2 yards away from the goal line. So Kupp definitely could get involved, but at the moment it looks like Shaheed is more of a better upside swing. So I think I'm going to bench Cooper Kupp and only start Shaheed if I'm desperate. But wouldn't shock me at all if Kupp scores a touchdown in a revenge spot. I do think they would like to get him in the end zone. The matchup is awesome. Top 10 against the Rams last 4 weeks. It does rank top 2. So that's an upside swing for sure, but I think it's too risky to bet on. I would pass on Cooper Kupp. But the rookie tight end, Terrence Ferguson, not emerging yet. Not going to trust him. Davis Allen might get more looks without Adams. I think he's above Terrence Ferguson, but both of them are behind Colby Parkinson. No thanks with either. And then you have to be benching Adams, assuming he doesn't play. He's doubtful. I'm going to assume that holds, and he's inactive on Thursday. But Torrey Horton has a chance to return to practice, but I don't think it's going to happen. It's very unlikely he returns off IR before the playoff picture does begin. There's a chance, like I said, he could start practicing this week, but it's not going to happen next week. Maybe, but odds are they'll hold him for January come the playoffs. So those are my start sits. I think the obvious names are JSN, Puka, Kyron, and then the defenses. But Colby Parkinson has earned your trust. Definitely a valuable tight end right now. High touchdown potential. Good matchup. And then Walker steps up. I think he's worth a start as well this week. But Corum for some elite upside. Same with Shaheed. And then Stafford, hard to bench, but I think outside my top 10, maybe even outside my top 12 this week. I got a bad feeling. He's got capped upside. With no Adams, there's a world he gives you less than 15 points. So good luck with Stafford. Not dying to force him in the lineup, but understandable if you do. And this will be an interesting game given the weather. Now we're moving on to Saturday. This game is in Landover, Maryland, between the Commanders and Eagles. And there is a minor chance of rain, pretty low, only 10%. But there is a chance by the time we hit Saturday, that forecast does change. So I don't think it will play a role, but weather, got to monitor it just a little bit. I doubt it will play a factor. But the Eagles, their defense is stepping up in general against most positions, especially quarterback. That's been a mostly tough spot. Kenny Pickett was dog shit last week. But I do think Mariota, with his rushing stats, can still be viable in your lineup. Not an elite play, but decent. Running back position, though, has really torched the Eagles at the moment. On the year, it ranks as the 6th best matchup. Last 4 weeks, it would rank top 2, but I did get burned endorsing Ashton Genty, believing these stats last week, and perhaps you don't want to get burned again. So given the rotation in Washington, I think it's a little harder to trust, but on paper, this is a good matchup for the running back position. Wide receiver, though, does struggle, especially lately. It's down to the 3rd toughest matchup. It would rank number 30 in the last 4 weeks. And on the year, it is bottom 10. So tough spot for the receivers. Good luck there. And then against tight end, it's a very difficult matchup. On the season, it does rank bottom 3, the 30th matchup in terms of points allowed. So not a good spot for the backup tight end, Ben Sennett. Don't think this is his week. However, against Washington, every matchup is at least top 7, if not top 5. So quarterback, big upgrade for Jalen Hurts. While the Commanders are trending down lately, it's just number 12 last 4 games. Still, I would be starting Jalen Hurts. But the running back position gets a big boost all year long, top 7 matchup here. So Saquon should be a very safe starter. And then in the last 5 games, the Commanders would rank 24th, but on the year, it's the 5th best matchup for receivers. So an upgrade I would like to chase, definitely trusting A.J. Brown at the very least. And then tight ends also dominate against the Commanders this year. Top 4 matchup, and I think Dallas Goedert will go off for the 2nd week in a row. So the starts in this game, I think, are no-brainers. Definitely just the Eagles' offense. Jalen Hurts, always got to start him. Might not be like a top 3 quarterback anymore, but no-brainer in the top 10. Definitely a good matchup as well. So got to start him. I would expect 20 plus points pretty easily. And then Saquon in a top 7 matchup. He's been playing better lately. I definitely am going to upgrade him and keep him in the lineup. So absolutely a top 10 play this week, a no-brainer with Saquon. He also owns this matchup, whether it's with the Giants or the Eagles. He is averaging 26.9 points per game in his last 4 versus the Commanders. I would assume he goes well over 20 points this week. So he's potentially a top 3 play. A.J. Brown has been a clear top 5 receiver as of late. He's dominating. I would absolutely trust him. The Commanders wouldn't scare me at all. They're playing better, but not good enough for me to consider A.J. Brown a downgrade. In his last 4 games versus Washington, he also absolutely owns them, an average of 22.9 points per game, 117 yards per game, and 5 touchdowns in his last 4 against Washington. So a lock-in lineup, absolutely a must start. And after last week, I apologize for not telling you to start Dallas Goedert. An insanely productive game in a tough matchup. This week he gets a top 5 matchup. I am absolutely locking in Dallas Goedert to the lineup. But I don't think the Eagles are going to be as safe of a play this week. Definitely close to the top 10, a high-end flex play. But I do think there's some other opportunities. And sometimes in this division rivalry, the Commanders do play well. Sometimes they give them a good run for their money. We've seen some close games between Philly and Washington, and I don't see the Commanders' defense stopping them. So if it's going to be a close game, it would be more of a shootout, and that's where some risk does factor in with the Eagles. There have been times where they do let you down, despite them looking like a great roster. On occasion, they're not the best fantasy play at defense. So more of a lower-end top 12 option, high-end flex option. Not going to guarantee that I rank them in the top 10 this week. But Mariota, I think, is an interesting high-end flex play. At quarterback, it's tough to trust him against Philly, but he gives you the rushing stats, and the Eagles, at times, have slipped up on defense. So Mariota has gotten good fantasy numbers at times. He's interesting, but in the fantasy playoffs in the semifinals, are you really forcing him in the lineup? Odds are he's not ranked in the top 12. So good luck in Superflex, though. I think he's definitely worth it. Some upside for sure. However, Devontae Smith has been really limited as of late, and I don't feel that confident in locking him into the lineup. So he's a good option. Definitely some upside here against Washington. I looked up Devontae Smith's last 4 games versus the Commanders. He's averaging 10.9 points per game and averages 64 yards per game, but only 1 touchdown. That's where I'm worried about Devontae. There's a world where this week it doesn't quite work out. And then in those last 4 games, that Washington defense has been getting better. It would rank 24th. So I see room for A.J. Brown to dominate, maybe not both players. And given Jalen Hurts is just not quite passing the ball very effectively, if there's one player I'm more reluctant to trust, it's definitely Devontae. So just a flex play, more of the high-end variety, but still a bit risky. Might only get 10 points, and that's fine, but it's definitely just a flex option. And then Terry gets a tougher matchup for sure. I could see Cooper DeJean draped on him and give him a tough time. Terry only averages 9.4 points per game in his last 4 games versus the Eagles. He's doing a little bit less than what Devontae offers. And I'm already a bit reluctant to trust Devontae, so if the averages are diminished for Terry, this is a tougher spot. So just a flex play, not going to be as good as last week, but he is playing very well at the moment. I don't think he's a player I'm going to bench outright, depending on my depth. I'll consider Terry as probably a top 30 wide receiver this week. But Debo has owned the Eagles when he played for the Niners. With the Commanders, we haven't seen it yet. So a tougher matchup. I'm not dying to trust him. He has kind of fallen off a little bit. Now that Terry's healthy, it's not the safest play. And without Jaden Daniels, Mariota just doesn't really keep both of them viable all the time. So Debo, more of like a top 40 receiver. Terry, I'd probably have him like 10 spots higher, but still in the flex conversation. Not the worst play you could find, but this will be a really interesting game at running back for the Commanders, because last week JCM was really good, but very few people started him. He had really fallen off for a while. And there is a world where Chris Rodriguez does return. Last I checked, Rodriguez is already getting back to practice, but obviously didn't play last week, so not a guarantee at the moment. And Rodriguez was kind of overtaking him, especially on the goal line. So my long shot would be Rodriguez, definitely maybe a safer floor given his role in the offense, but I could also see JCM reemerge as the RB1. Last week was good, and this matchup is also pretty fire. So I don't know what to make of it. I want to tell you JCM is a safer start, but because it looks like Rodriguez is probably going to play, that's where I'm reluctant to endorse either. So very untrustworthy. If you tell me Rodriguez is a lock to suit up, I think I'd rather start him, assuming he's more likely to score a touchdown. I think he's a better bet, but JCM maybe gets this backfield to himself again. If that's the case, I'll rank him higher, definitely in the top 25 at the worst. But good luck. If it turns out like Genty did last week, you don't want either of them. But then there is a world where Ben Sinnott does step up as the tight end in this offense. He had some good yardage on his one catch last week, but not enough volume to trust. This matchup is bad, so no thanks on Ben Sinnott. But he could still emerge. I could see Ben Sinnott actually contribute in this offense at some point. But the Commanders defense got to bench him. The Eagles offense should play well. They have a chance to lock up the playoff spot and win the division with this game. So I think they'll play well on Saturday. I would trust the Eagles offense. However, once they lock up the division, they might check out. So maybe 2 weeks later in week 18, the Commanders might be valuable, but this week, no thanks at all. And then Treylon Burks does play, but not going to start him, that's for sure. Tank Bigsby, not getting enough volume, neither does Will Shipley, so not starting a backup running back for the Eagles. And then Jahan Dotson occasionally gets a deep target, but unless it hits for a touchdown, he's irrelevant, so no thanks with him. Daniels is out yet again, and so is Zach Ertz. He's on IR. So those are the start sits. I think it's really tough to say if you can start a Commanders running back. JCM and Rodriguez are in a big committee, so that's really tough to trust. I think if Rodriguez is healthy, though, I'd rather start him than JCM. But otherwise, we're starting the Eagles offense with confidence, except for Devontae Smith. He's more of a flex play. The Eagles defense has upside this week. Definitely an intriguing matchup here. But Mariota, a decent flex play. Terry and Debo, some diminished projections in my opinion. More likely, I will bench at least Debo and just be flexing Terry McLaurin, not a lock in the lineup, in my opinion. So that's it for this game. Let's move on to the second game on Saturday. And in this one, we have some questionable defensive stats, because with the loss of Micah Parsons, I'm not sure the Packers defense is as scary, because the pass rush is pretty important, and this 22nd ranked quarterback matchup is probably going to be easier without Parsons. So I don't think Caleb deserves a significant downgrade. I don't think he'll be atrocious, that's for sure. However, running back, I think is also going to be a bit easier. Parsons is not really elite at stopping the run, so maybe that one stays tough. But against Green Bay, given how the Bears use the running back position, I still think I'm starting at least DeAndre Swift. But against receiver, it ranks 13th on the year, but last 4 games, it's definitely a good spot. Would rank top 5 in the last month. So I would trust DJ Moore. He's been playing great at the moment. If Rome Odunze returns, that might be tougher to trust, but DJ Moore gets an upgrade, and if Odunze doesn't play, then even Luther Burden would have some high upside this week. But against tight end, it's a very tough spot. On the year, it would rank as a below average matchup number 20, but in the last month, it ranks bottom 5. It would rank 29th. So they are stepping up in that regard. Against the tight end position, it's much tougher to score on the Packers. But when it comes to the Bears defense against quarterbacks, it would rank 13th this year, so a pretty neutral, slightly above average spot. But lately it's getting tougher. It is down to number 27 in the last 4 games. So maybe you don't trust Jordan Love as much as this matchup would indicate, but he's been playing well. Even against Denver, I didn't hate his performance too much, and I wouldn't expect as many turnovers against the Bears. So I think Love is still pretty interesting this week. Against the running back position, it is actually very difficult. Last 4 games, the Bears have allowed the second fewest fantasy points to the running back position. So on the year ranks 20th, last 4 games ranks 31st. Not ideal at all for Josh Jacobs. Against receiver, though, it's a top 7 matchup despite the return of Jalen Johnson. They still give up a lot of fantasy points to receivers, and I would feel confident in trusting the Packers wideouts, assuming Watson is healthy. I think he's a good play, but against tight end, it's a neutral matchup, so maybe you can feel confident about Luke Musgrave this week. I still don't want to trust him, though. That feels a little too tough, but at running back, if you have Josh Jacobs, you can never bench him, so he's a lock in the lineup. A bad matchup, though. I could see a world with like less than 60 rushing yards this week. His efficiency might be very bad. However, I'm always trusting him to find the end zone. So let's keep Jacobs in the lineup, but maybe not a elite top 6 running back this week. And then DeAndre Swift's on a heater right now, definitely playing very well. I want to trust him. The Packers run defense is giving up 93 yards per game on the ground, on 3.9 yards per carry. However, there's also a couple touchdowns in that respect, and I think at this point in time, Swift is just playing too well to bench him. So definitely a top 20 play. Last week, I told you to start him. That was a great call against the Cleveland Browns. However, DJ Moore is playing out of his mind, and I had the name on the side here, but still, DJ Moore I think is a good start. And his production is just out of this world right now. The touchdowns are finally hitting. DJ Moore had a very rough stretch for a long time with no touchdowns. Now it's pretty safe to bet on. And then this Bears matchup is trending way up at the moment. Ranks top 5 in the last 4 weeks. So given DJ Moore's recent history, I think he needs to stay in the lineup. But Christian Watson, not a lock to play, but does appear to be trending in that direction. From what I've read, he's already back with the team and is going to be practicing this week, at least in limited capacity. I think he'll be healthy on Saturday. So assuming he plays, they need him a lot. This matchup is top 7. I would keep Christian Watson in the lineup. The volume is going to be the highest among all Packers wideouts, more likely for Christian Watson. But Jordan Love, as long as Watson plays, I think is a relatively safe start. Maybe closer to like number 12 at quarterback, but I think he has good upside, and the Bears matchup doesn't scare me enough to look away from Jordan Love in the lineup. So if you've been relying on him, the touchdowns I think will hit this week. I like his value. I think it's a close game, so Love will step up. But I think the Bears will win, and I think Caleb will play very well in this rematch. From a couple weeks ago, I think he really learned a lot just in the second half. He looked way better than the first half, and off of the Browns game, not having to do a ton to win the game, they should really step up in this matchup at home. I think they're going to play very well with no Micah Parsons. He won't be scrambling as much. I trust Ben Johnson, and I got a bad feeling about that Packers defense in this matchup. So Caleb, I think, has very high upside, but he's been volatile. I understand if he feels too risky to trust, but I think he'll give you roughly 20 points in this matchup again. But Jaden Reed has some awesome upside. If Christian Watson doesn't play, I think he'd be an automatic start. But I do think Watson will be back, and that's why Reed is more of a capped upside. low floor type of option. Last week he had 8 points, but at times he does really emerge with touchdown production. That hasn't been the case since returning from injury, though, and we just haven't seen the blow-up game to feel confident that it's going to hit. But the volume is kind of the same as any of the other top receivers. So with him and Watson, I don't think Love is going to look elsewhere too often. He will get like 6 or 7 targets this week, probably like 4 or 5 catches, and that's kind of the maximum you can get in the Packers offense. They don't give you a lot of volume, but whenever it goes in your direction, it's down the field. Love likes to chuck it deep. And then Reed is really dynamic. He also gets some work in the run game. He can score from actually anywhere. So elite upside with Reed, I think a decent floor, a very legit flex, especially with the injury to Christian Watson and a top 7 matchup here. I think Reed will be a top 30 play at receiver, but an interesting flex option has been playing really well in the last month. Luther Burden is stepping up quite a bit, and especially given Rome Odunze keeps getting hurt with his foot injury, I think that might happen again. Maybe Odunze doesn't play for the 3rd week in a row, and Burden contributes again. He's been giving you very consistent yardage. 2 weeks ago in this matchup against the Packers, he had 6 targets, 4 catches, and 67 yards. So he's getting targeted deep down the field. If one of those can hit for a touchdown, you're going to have very high upside with Luther Burden. But in general, you're getting about 8 to 9 points with him. He's a legit flex play right now, but not like an elite upside option either. So hoping for a touchdown, it may not hit, but I think in terms of bust-proof flex plays, Luther Burden is absolutely a top 40 option with no Rome Odunze. But if Rome plays, I wouldn't feel as confident, so maybe keep an eye on that injury report. And then Colston Loveland did score a touchdown against the Packers last time around. 2 weeks ago, he had 5 targets, 4 catches, 29 yards, and a touchdown, 10.9 points, but that is very reliant on a touchdown. So this matchup has been very difficult for tight ends. I would consider Loveland a lower end streaming option, not an elite play given the matchup against the Packers, but has been contributing with no Rome Odunze. He's more interesting for sure. So Loveland, I wouldn't entirely dismiss, but not my favorite spot, pretty touchdown dependent, if you ask me. Kyle Monangai, also very touchdown dependent and did kind of fade away a little bit last week. So against the Packers, not the easiest spot. I think you need a touchdown, and just like Colston Loveland, that's a little bit hard to trust. At running back, the bar is a bit higher. So he'll be a lower end flex play, not a top 25 running back at this point in time. The position's getting a bit deeper, and he is still a backup. But I could see him vulture Swift. I could see him give you a touchdown easily. He might still give you 10 points. So definitely don't want to outright bench him, but a flex play nonetheless. The Bears defense, I think, has some interesting dark horse potential. If you told me Watson doesn't play and they limit Jacobs like they've been limiting running backs lately, and the Bears have some value. The Bears have been forcing turnovers. I could see some picks as well. So Bears are sneaky, but against Green Bay, I think it's a little too cute. I doubt I'm going to rank him top 16 at the position, but I could see a world where they do have good value. It is possible, but I'd probably bet against it. Romeo Doubs is a bit interesting, especially if Watson doesn't suit up, but he has a very low track record against the Chicago Bears. In his last 4 games, while he has 2 touchdowns, he only has an average of 11 yards per game receiving. Doubs does not show up against Chicago historically. So there's a world where it works out. I wouldn't expect it, though. I think you need Watson not to play, and I think he will be healthy. So no thanks with Romeo Doubs. And then Cole Kmet sometimes factors in, but not enough to trust. Got to bench him. Zacchaeus could score a touchdown, but might only have like 2 catches, and that's not worth betting on. So no thanks with him. Give me Luther Burden well above him. And then the Packers defense, I don't think this is the week. Without Micah Parsons, that's kind of the only reason why they were intriguing. And even with him, they weren't quite like elite on defense. They have like no turnover touchdowns this year. I can't think of a pick 6 or fumble recovery that has scored a touchdown from the Packers all year. It's been really low capped upside, but a high end floor most of the time. Without Parsons, I think that floor goes away. So got to bench him in my opinion. Not a safe start. This game I think is more of a shootout than a low scoring matchup. And then Luke Musgrave did have decent yardage last week. The matchup's not atrociously terrible. However, he's just not contributing enough. Even in a good matchup, he only had like 7 points last week, and I don't feel comfortable ranking him top 12. not even top 20 most of the time. So gonna pass on Musgrave. Wicks is interesting. He stepped up at times, but it's so random, so hard to believe in. Unless Watson doesn't play, I have no interest in Wicks. And then Golden actually contributed a little last week, but never consistent this year. I think you should be benching Matthew Golden. And then Emmanuel Wilson, not gonna have a good matchup. Got to bench him too. And Rome Odunze at this point in time, I would assume, does not play. Was ruled out pregame. That was a very bad sign. He didn't practice on Wednesday today. So that's a trend that's repeated consistently. Maybe Rome does come back to the lineup. But at the moment, I wouldn't bet on it. I would probably bench him. More likely than not. So that's it for this matchup here. I think if Odunze does play, it makes starting DJ Moore or Luther Burden much more difficult, but I still think they're more valuable than him. And otherwise, I am endorsing Caleb this week. Everyone else, I think, needs to be in your lineup. Swift is always there. Jacobs always there as well. Watson has earned your trust, and then Love and Caleb, I think in a high upside matchup like this, could go back and forth and score touchdowns repeatedly. I see some high scoring in this game. So I do want pieces on Saturday. This game has some upside, but once we hit Jaden Reed, I think we're only talking about flex plays at best. Now I'd like to move on to Sunday Night Football. The Ravens are hosting New England, and I got a good feeling this game is going to be very entertaining, but more high scoring than defensive. I don't feel great about like a 23-21 type of game. I think it's more likely just like that Bills game, 35-31, wouldn't shock me at all. But the Patriots defense has been a bit tough against the running back position, ranks bottom 6 on the year, number 27. In the last month, however, that is trending well above average. It would rank 15th at the moment. So more of a neutral spot, not a big downgrade. And it's also not a downgrade for quarterback either. Also ranks 15th on the season. So I do think Lamar has some value in this game. Not going to panic with Lamar Jackson. He played well last week. I don't think it's a tough spot against the Patriots. But against a receiver, it would rank 18th on the year. Actually, in the last month, it ranks bottom 5, though, down to 29. That's not good. So given Christian Gonzalez is a lockdown corner, I think I would be a bit worried about Zay Flowers a little bit, but Flowers has been kind of bust proof. I've been wrong every time I've told you to bench Zay Flowers. So that I don't want to bet against, to be honest, but I'm a bit worried about it, not going to lie. And then versus tight ends, it's a top 10 matchup. So last week it was the best matchup and it didn't matter, but on paper you should be upgrading Andrews and likely. The Ravens defense is getting better lately on the season. Now they're a neutral matchup for quarterback, would rank 19th. And if you rewind like 2 months ago, it was a top 10 matchup, very easy to score on Baltimore. So they are getting better on defense, no doubt about it. Against running backs, it's also neutral now, ranks 13th. A couple months ago, it would have been top 5, so getting tougher for sure. Against receiver, on the year, it's number 11. However, it is trending down by about a full tier. It's more of a neutral spot. Would rank 16th in the last month. But against tight end, they don't really give up much against that position, ranks bottom 5 in terms of matchups. So I don't feel good about a Patriots tight end against the Ravens. But in terms of quarterbacks, I think Lamar has earned must-start status again. Definitely going to keep him in the lineup. If you're still alive with Lamar, I think you have to keep him in the lineup. The upside is still elite, and I think the floor is now coming back. He's a much safer play as of the last 2 games. But Drake May, whether it's on the ground or in the passing game, always finds a way to score and give you usually 2 touchdowns minimum. So after last week against the Bills, which was a much tougher matchup, I would tell you Drake May is a safe start. He's been great this year, not going to bench him. If I have him, if I've advanced with Drake May, he's in my lineup yet again. But Travion Henderson has been one of the highest upside swings you can find. And after the amazing game against the Bills, I think he's clearly overtaken Ramondre Stevenson. The pass blocking was a problem for him. Now it seems to be improved. And off the bye, while Ramondre had the first drive of the game, Travion was way more effective, definitely finished the game with way more touches. So against the Ravens, I would keep him in the lineup. It's not a downgrade at all. And then Derrick Henry has to stay in the lineup. The Patriots matchup is tough, but the last month it's more neutral, and Henry is usually a lock to score a touchdown. So let's keep him in the lineup. I'm going to continue to start Derrick Henry. However, Zay Flowers, I think I just have to start. He's been too dynamic, too productive, and I think this game is more of a shootout. So despite my concerns on the matchup, Christian Gonzalez scares the shit out of me. Not going to lie, it does feel rather risky. Every time I've faded Flowers, on a gut instinct or just a matchup, I've been wrong. He's proved me wrong to doubt him. So Flowers, I think, is just too productive. I got to keep him. The floor is always there. He's averaging like minimum 60 yards every week. So a safe play, I'll keep starting Zay Flowers. And then Andrews gets a top 10 matchup. I think he's more involved than Isaiah Likely. I think I'm going to start Andrews this week. I think a touchdown is going to hit. I think it's a high-scoring game. So I want the pieces. I want the obvious parts of the Ravens offense. And if I get burned with Likely actually stepping up again, so be it. They gave Andrews the contract extension. I think they want to keep him as the main guy. And after last week, Likely burned me too much to trust him. So let's go back to Andrews. I think he'll be fine, but needs a touchdown. I think it does hit, though, against the Patriots. Last 4 games, they've allowed 6.3 catches to tight ends, 54 yards per game, and 2 tight end touchdowns in that 4-game span. So I think it'll hit. I think Andrews is the man that will score that touchdown. But in terms of flex plays, last week was terrible for Stephon Diggs. So while he's a high-end upside flex play for sure, I'm probably going to tell you to start him. Last week was just so bad, and this offense is a bit too random to know exactly what'll happen. So good luck with Diggs. I could see it burn you like it did last week, but in general, this Ravens matchup has been top 12, so not going to panic enough. He's still the top target for Drake May, who I expect to play well. I think he'll get the yards coming back to Diggs. Doubt he has 2 stinkers in a row, but Kayshon Boutte has elite upside down the field, definitely the go-to target in the play action game. And Boutte, I think, has elite upside if this game is indeed a shootout. But at times, the Ravens defense does step up. I could see Drake May not connect down the field. If you don't hit on like a 40-yard pass, then Boutte rarely goes over 6 points. But he could also give you a touchdown. Boutte has like that 15-point upside that's hard to find at the low end flex territory. Probably outside the top 36, though, in the rankings. Always a bit risky to trust Boutte, but high return if it works out, good for you. And then Ramondre Stevenson, I think, has clearly lost the job to Travion, but has not gone away entirely. But the risk of a fumble, I think, is not worth trusting. Just a low-end flex play, going to be ranked outside my top 30 at the position. Unless you're desperate in a deeper format, I'm going to tell you to bench Ramondre. But I could also see him get back in the end zone. Wouldn't shock me at all. But Keaton Mitchell does factor in behind Derrick Henry. He still gets looks, so some upside with him, but needs a touchdown. Not the best matchup, so I think I'll pass, but wouldn't shock me at all if he gets you another like 70 yards on like 8 carries. He's very efficient when he does touch the football. The Patriots are an interesting long shot candidate, though, at defense. If the Patriots are going to win this game, it's because their defense steps up, and it's because Lamar Jackson looks rather mid. I don't think the Patriots can win unless the Ravens offense looks like shit. So I don't think it'll happen, but the Patriots have stepped up at times, and then the Ravens have also looked very mediocre at times as well. So there's a world that works out, but I would pass. I'm going to hold on the Patriots, though, in my lineup, though, on the bench, because next week they get the Jets, and then they get the Dolphins against Quinn Ewers. So Patriots, hold on to them, but probably not going to start him against Lamar Jackson. That game, I think, is more like high scoring than you would like. And then Hunter Henry gets a terrible matchup. So after last week in another bad matchup, I'm going to believe that that's a reason to downgrade him. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I am worried about Hunter Henry not giving you the yardage. I think he'll rely on a touchdown in this game. So good luck there. I think it's not worth it. But Pop Douglas is never really worth it. Could score a touchdown, but never getting more than like 4 targets and rarely more than 2 catches. So no thanks with him. Matt Collins could get a deep shot, but not going to trust him. Way too risky. And then the Ravens defense at times steps up, but I think they're going to win. And I think this game is high scoring. I don't think their defense plays elite. So no thanks with the Ravens. I'll pass. I don't think it's worth it. Likely burned me so bad last week with a bagel. I'm done with him. So maybe you're willing to trust him, but I'm not. No thanks. Even in a good matchup, I'm done. DeAndre Hopkins, never getting enough volume, so got to bench him. Rashad Bateman's been inactive lately, so not expecting him to play, but even if he does, I wouldn't trust him. And then Kyle Williams, only a deep shot touchdown. House call. Without it, you're getting nothing. So all or nothing with Kyle Williams, got to bench him. That's for sure. So the must starts are Lamar and Drake May. Travion and Derrick Henry will definitely be ranked top 20 at the worst. And then given the upside in this game, I think Zay Flowers is worth starting. So is Mark Andrews. And then it's a little tricky in New England, but Stephon Diggs and Kayshon Boutte, definitely legit flex plays with upside. I'll probably bench Ramondre, but will factor in at running back outside the top 30 a little bit. So good luck there. I feel like Hunter Henry is not a safe play, though. That's the only player you might be questioning why I'm going to tell you to bench him. But I told you to bench him last week. That was also a good call. But the last game we're going to talk about in this video takes place on Monday night. We have the Niners traveling to Indianapolis, and weather's not a problem. It'll be indoors in a dome. So I could see the Niners offense go nuclear, and given the state of the Colts offense, it's really hard to trust them without Daniel Jones. So these are the defensive matchups. When it comes to the Niners defense against the quarterback position, it's a top 10 matchup on the season. But last 4 weeks, it's down to number 21, so not going to upgrade Rivers at all. That's a no-brainer. Got to bench Rivers. But against running back, it's neutral, so Taylor might be fine. Not going to panic there. Against receiver, it's also neutral, but in the last month, it ranks 19th, a bit tougher. So maybe I would downgrade Pittman and the other pass catchers. And then against tight end, it's a good spot, but with Rivers, it was a good spot for Tyler Warren last week, and he did nothing. I'm not going to trust the Colts offense. So that's a bummer. The quarterback situation kind of wastes a good matchup, but the Colts defense is a bit tougher for Brock Purdy, bottom 10 matchup. So perhaps pump the brakes a little bit, but I doubt I'm going to panic. Against running backs, it's also bottom 11. So minor downgrade, but also not going to panic with CMC. And then for receiver, it's a top 4 matchup. So I would upgrade Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall, but perhaps not for touchdowns. Where the Colts are vulnerable against receiver is in the yardage department. Their average stat line given up is 13.8 catches for 215 yards per game and only 3 touchdowns for wide receivers in the last 4 games. So yards is where I'm excited. I think I'd hit the higher on the projections of yardage, not touchdowns, with the receivers of the Niners. But against the Colts, it's a top 11 matchup for tight end, and they have given up an average of 51 yards per game in the last month. It's down to number 20 last 4 weeks, but still a good spot. On the year, I would trust George Kittle. So this game's a bit straightforward. If you have the Niners studs, got to start him. CMC, always a lock in the lineup. And same with Jonathan Taylor. Whether you're worried about Rivers in that offense or not, I think you have to keep him in the lineup. Cannot bench Jonathan Taylor, but he's not playing it at the same level. Since the bye, he's actually been rather average at running back. But Brock Purdy had an awesome game last week, and I think they're going to dominate possession this week. So I'm going to trust Purdy. I think he'll play very well against the Colts in the dome, and I would trust touchdowns with Brock Purdy this week. But George Kittle, always lock in the lineup, always a top 3 tight end. I would definitely upgrade him again this week. And Juwan Jennings, I told you to start. That was a very good call. Had 2 touchdowns, but the yardage was a little less than I thought. This week, I think it'll be the opposite. Maybe not a touchdown, but definitely high yardage. I would start Juwan Jennings. But off the bye, Ricky Pearsall had a good game, so not dying to lock him in the lineup, but definitely some upside showcase. I think he's more valuable. Definitely more of a high-end flex play now, and I think he's more valuable for sure, but still a bit tricky. The matchup, though, is good. I think he'll also contribute, yet again, with a lot of yards. But the Niners defense, definitely intriguing against Phillip Rivers, but last week I thought they were valuable against the Titans. They did not show up like I thought. And then I also thought the Seahawks would be a great play against Rivers last week, and they were pretty mid as well. So the Niners, I think, are fine, but not top 10, not elite. Given their injuries, they'll be okay, but not an automatic start, in my opinion. There's a world where the Colts offense plays better, and maybe Jonathan Taylor does burn you at the end of the day. But maybe Tyler Warren does step up in the second game with Rivers. I doubt it, though. They looked so inept in terms of yardage. It's been brutal. And same with Pittman. Like, even if Pittman gets like 5 catches, which, well, after last week, I wouldn't bet on at all, I wouldn't expect more than like 30 yards. They're all right near the line of scrimmage, all relying on Yak. And it's just like, you're hoping for a touchdown. These are the 2 names most likely to get it. But boy, it feels way out of reach with Warren and Pittman. Only a touchdown value there. I would pass more likely than not. And same with Alec Pierce and Josh Downs. I know Downs scored a touchdown last week, but without it, you would have gotten a bagel. And Pierce had very limited yardage as well. Rivers is just not chucking it down the field. So got to bench Rivers and his pass catchers. It's not worth it at all. Daniel Jones is inactive. And against the Commanders, I'm absolutely benching the Colts defense. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's a terrible decision, if you ask me. But Brian Robinson Jr., not getting enough volume, but could maybe get a vulture touchdown in garbage time. It's possible. Same with Juszczyk, but never valuable in fantasy only in like DFS for like a catch or two. And then Demarcus Robinson, no way I'm starting him either. But he did factor in a little bit last week. Don't want to completely forget about him. But if you're not starting a Niner, then the only one I would consider is Jonathan Taylor. It's pretty straightforward on Monday night who you're going to start. But before I go, I would like to share with you my entry for Thursday Night Football. I have a good feeling that the Seahawks offense is going to look good and that Blake Corum will score another touchdown. So I found some very high payouts on all of these, and I would like to share it with you. This $5 entry would pay out $1,115 if all five are correct. I used a 50% profit boost token, but still the payout is insane. The multiplier on this is 223 times your buy-in. So if you're interested, you can get a sign-up bonus with promo code BLUNT. Once you play your first $5, you'll get $75 in bonus funds. But this is the entry I am interested in on Thursday night. We have a Blake Corum touchdown. He's been on fire, has 4 touchdowns last 3 games. I think that's a very interesting, compelling bet to make. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba is averaging well over 100 yards per game this year. When he plays well against the Rams, he goes way over 100 yards. There's a couple where he's kind of shit the bed, but I think odds are JSN plays well. The Rams defense is giving up a ton of yards at the moment. So that one is pretty safe. Over 89 yards in the passing game for JSN almost always hits. And then Cooper Kupp against his former team. Let's give him a revenge game touchdown. That one's very risky, but I think it could work out. Let's take our swing. This one, if you want to play it safe, I would get rid of. This one is very tough to guarantee, but Kenneth Walker plays awesome against the Rams historically. He's averaging over 100 yards from scrimmage, so I hit the higher on 89.5 total yards. I think he will go over 90 this week, so I like Kenneth Walker. I think he'll show up. And then I also think Shaheed is playing well at the moment. Good matchup for him. He's averaging 71 yards in his last 2 games. So I hit the higher on 49.5. I think down the field he will get targeted and will show up with the yardage. So really the only one I'm worried about is the Cooper Kupp touchdown, but he was this close to scoring twice last time, and I think they want him to score a touchdown in this game. So those are my picks. All 5 of them, 4 of them with the Seahawks, and then given Adams' injury, I'm not sure what's going to happen with the Rams, but I do like the odds on Blake Corum to score a touchdown. So those are my picks. Very high payout. A reminder, $1,115 if all 5 would hit. And a reminder, new customers who sign up to Underdog with promo code BLUNT, once they play their first 5, they get $75 in bonus funds, but you have to use promo code BLUNT. The link is in the description. But before I go, I have one more entry I'm also excited about. I think those touchdowns are going to hit in the Green Bay passing game. I think Watson will score a touchdown. I think Jaden Reed is also going to score a touchdown. I'm trusting Jordan Love a lot this week. So as long as Christian Watson is healthy, let's hit the higher on half a touchdown anytime. I think it'll hit. And same with Jaden Reed. It's been about time he gets in the end zone. So I like that upside for the Packers offense. The pass catchers get a good matchup. So let's bet on touchdowns this week. And then TreVeyon Henderson has been balling out. Definitely some high upside down the field with some elite rushing stats. I think in terms of his biggest rush attempt this week, it's going to go over 20 yards. So let's hit the higher on 17.5. The return on investment is pretty high, and the multiplier I think is worth it. But Drake May, I worry about in the rushing department this week. The Ravens only give up 8 rushing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks in the last 4. And in general, Drake May is not running as much as he did last week. So let's capitalize on the increased projection. In general, Drake May is not projected for over 20 rushing yards. So let's hit the under on 23.5. And then for Hunter Henry, 41 yards is kind of rare for him in the first place. But the Ravens are tough in terms of matchups. They've only allowed 33 yards per game on average to the position in the last month. So I think this is a no-brainer. Hitting the under on 40 yards, I think will hit on Hunter Henry. He can score a touchdown, but not going to go over 40 yards, in my opinion. So those are the 5 I like as well. Not in the same game, so you're going to have to wait for Sunday night for this to hit. And maybe on Saturday, one of these touchdowns doesn't cash. Perhaps it gets ruined before Sunday even happens. But if all 5 hit, I would turn $3 into $187. The multiplier is much lower than the first one, but 62 times your buy-in, that's pretty nice. And I'm willing to take a swing on these 5 picks. So these are both of my entries this weekend. $8 down with the potential to bring home just over $1,300. That'd be awesome. Odds are it doesn't happen. I need all 5 to hit on both for them to cash, but I do feel optimistic. I like the odds on the Seahawks one. If the Cooper Kupp touchdown doesn't work out, I'll be sad, but I think it's worth the swing, in my opinion. So that's it for this video. A reminder, if you're looking for all of the remaining Sunday games in the morning and afternoon, that will be posted in part 2 on Thursday mornings. So subscribe if you don't want to miss out. But that's going to be it for me in this video. My name's Adam Riancho, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.